going to go ahead and kick off this morning's virtual meeting with Mr. Jason Peters, our task force co-chair. Jason?
Good morning. Greg, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. Thank you, Greg. Good morning. I'm Jason Peters, the co-chair for the Suncoast Corridor Task Force team. I'm sitting in for our chairman, District 2 Secretary Greg Evans. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. Secretary Evans is in attendance. However, during last week's preparations, he asked if I would chair today's meeting. I'm certainly honored to serve in this capacity, and I look forward to a productive day. Also, under the circumstances that we find ourselves, I hope you and your families and communities continue to be well and safe. I do want to express my sincere appreciation to all of you for your participation in the meetings, and that I know that you're working very hard to try to balance your professional and personal lives during these unusual times. The work that you are doing as a task force is a critical element of the project, and on behalf of the entire DOT, I want to say thank you for your being here and for your participation in the virtual meeting today. We also appreciate your flexibility in that we have continued to evolve these meetings into virtual meetings. If you'll notice, we're now calling them virtual meetings as opposed to webinars. And the intent there is to not just push information out to you, but to provide a venue for healthy and productive communication among the task force members. So today, we will be sharing a brief update on the technical analysis and the framework for your recommendations. Most of our time today will be mostly spent discussing the needs, the guiding principles, and the instructions for the project development and beyond. I do want to emphasize that we are in a pre-project development and environmental phase. The guiding principles that will be developed by this task force team will be one of the vital foundations that is used as we move into the initial development phase of the project. So today we'll start looking at the comprehensive list of high-level needs that were discussed earlier in the process and begin developing those guiding principles based on those needs. So we still have a lot of work to do, a deadline of having the task force report to the governor's office by November of this year. We also appreciate the participation from the members of the public. The 9 webinars that were held in April, May, and early June included participation from approximately 1,700 attendees, with 129 people actually providing public comments to the task force during the designated period. These numbers were well above our expectations, and we really appreciate that those results. I also want to thank the many members of the public who provided comments via email, letters, and other forms or formats. The public comment during the public comments for our webinar, the comments is only one way for our public to provide input. The public can comment and may submit comments at any time to our website or a link that's fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us, and it will become part of the public record. We will continue to compile those and share all those public comments that are received since February at our next meeting in July. Also in July, we hope to return to kind of a regular meeting schedule. We're kind of currently working on dates and logistics of those. Our future meetings are going to be a little bit different than what we experienced in prior to back in the fall when we had the face-to-face, but it will also be different from what we're kind of doing right now. We're looking at kind of a hybrid where there will be a venue where we have people that are participating face-to-face, but yet certainly there'll be other opportunities for others to participate remotely. And in establishing those logistics, some of the things that we definitely want to make sure that we do is we want to be respectful of others, and by doing so, we want to abide by the governor's executive order for a safe, smart, step-by-step plan for Florida's recovery. Certainly, too, we want to abide by the governor's sunshine laws and all applications of it for public meetings and rules. and we want to respect the level and comfort of your organization and guidelines with the in-person gatherings. Most importantly, we want to provide for a meeting format that maximizes our ability as a task force members to engage in discussion and develop a consensus, as well as for the public to participate and provide comments during the process. And with that, I'll turn this back over to one of our facilitators, Mr. Greg Garrett.
Thank you, Jason. It is great that we were able to meet again in this virtual manner. I would like to again say thank you to everyone for attending, for all your time and efforts. I am Greg Garrett. I'll be facilitating today's virtual meeting along with Guillermo Vidal, whom everyone knows from our previous task force meetings. I'm going to briefly cover several topics: the public comment period, logistics for the virtual meeting, and our rules of engagement, today's objectives and agenda, and a brief Florida Sunshine reminder. The public comment period begins at 11:30 a.m. or as soon as we are done with the task force member discussion. Requests to comment received by 11 a.m. today will be addressed during the public comment period in the order they were received. If you have not yet registered to provide public comment during today's virtual meeting and wish to do so, please sign up on the website under today's event. You'll need the link emailed to you. Please use the raised hand, if you need the link emailed to you, please use the raised hand function and one of our team members will email you the link to sign up. When your name is called, we will unmute your line for you to provide comment within your allotted time of 3 minutes. Only one person at a time will be unmuted. If you have self-muted, please be sure to unmute before speaking. If you did not submit your request in time to be able to speak today, please email your comments to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us. The virtual meeting is being recorded and will be available with other materials on the MCOR's website. You will remain muted for the presentations. Once we get into the task force member discussions, we will shift to a more interactive format. Similar to the previous webinar, our discussion today will be more like an in-person meeting. Instead of putting up your tent card to indicate you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can use the raised hands feature. We would ask you to remain self-muted when not speaking to reduce the background noise. I generally will recognize people in the order that they raise their hand. Although, as we do in an in-person meeting, I may manage the flow at times to allow members who have not yet had an opportunity to make a comment to speak, or to wrap up one thread of conversation before we begin another. I want to make sure the members of the public who are on the line recognize that this raised hands feature is for task force members only. Public comment will be during that part of the agenda. If you have self-muted, please be sure to unmute before speaking. A quick reminder, do not put the virtual meeting on hold or take another call, as we will get to listen to your hold music. One last note, we may have adjusted your username to readily identify you as a task force member for when we need to unmute your line. Please do not make any changes to this username so that you may be heard during roll call and the Q&A period. All right, today's objectives. For today, we're going to receive an update on the task force work plan and recommendations framework. We're also going to receive an update on the avoidance and attraction layers. We'll talk about refining high-level needs and the guiding principles and identify potential instructions for project development and beyond. And then we will receive public comments. Here's today's agenda. I'll do a quick recap of that. We're going to run through a refresher on the government and sunshine. Then we'll take roll call. We'll then have a presentation from Wei Shen on the revised task force work plan and recommendations framework, followed by a presentation from Brian Brooker on the updated avoidance and attraction areas. Then we'll have a discussion as a group about the high-level needs, followed by a discussion on selected guiding principles. We'll follow that up and briefly touch on next steps and then turn to public comment. The public comment period is scheduled to begin at 11:30 a.m. or as soon as the agenda items are complete. We hope all task force members will be able to stay on the line. Today, we have a short reminder of the government in the sunshine requirements. Generally speaking, task force members should not communicate verbal, email, or via a third party to another task force member on items under consideration by the task force. You may communicate on matters unrelated to task force topics. Mr. David Flynn from the Office of the Attorney General is online and can answer any questions regarding the Sunshine Law as it relates to the task force when we get to the question and answers part of the agenda. All right, we're going to roll into roll call now. Bear with me. All task force members were given a unique links to sign in. As task force members logged in, we've noted your attendance. I'm going to read through the names and organizations to note who is present and who is not in attendance. As we mentioned previously, if you are a substitute and we didn't recognize your attendance, please send an email to Ryan Asmus at ryan.asmus@dot.state.fl.us. All right, we're going to go into our roll call here. With us this morning, we have Secretary Greg Evans from the Florida Department of Transportation. He is here. From the Florida Department of Transportation, Jason Peters is here. Chris Wynn from Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission is here. Mark Futrell from the Florida Public Service Commission is here. Eric Anderson from Enterprise Florida is here. I also want to take this opportunity to welcome Eric as a new official task force member joining us on the Suncoast corridor. Eric is with Enterprise Florida and is taking over for Tim Vanderhoof. He is no strangers to MCORS, as he was already serving on the Southwest Central Florida Task Force and now has the great privilege of serving on all three task forces. Jeff Kennard from the Hernando Citrus Metropolitan Planning Organization is present. Scott Coons with the North Central Florida Regional Planning Council is present. Charles Lee from Audubon, Florida is here. Kent Wimmer from Defenders of Wildlife is here. Scott Carnahan from the Citrus County Commission is here. Anthony Adams from the Lafayette County Commission is not present. Diane Head from CareerSource Florida is here. Roger Goals from the Florida Department of Health is here. Mark Hatch from the Dixie County Commission is not present. Janet Bowman with the Nature Conservancy is here. Lawanda Pemberton from the Taylor County Commission is here. Chris Lee from the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation is present. Lyle Siegler from Northwest Florida Water Management District is present. Sherilyn Pickles with Madison County is present. Frank Gargano for the Southwest Florida Water Management District is present. Ronald Kitchen from the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council is here. Christopher Emanuel, Florida Chamber of Commerce is here. Todd Gray from the Gilchrist County Commission is not present. Ken Armstrong from the Florida Trucking Association is here. Mary Cross from the Florida Department of Education is present. Mary Elzey for the Florida Rural Water Association is present. Chris Bailey with the Florida Internet and Television Association is present. Kristen Dozier, Capital Region Transportation Planning Agency is here. Matt Brooks from the Levy County Commission is not present. Susan Ramsey from the Florida Economic Development Council is present. Charles Shin from the Florida Farm Bureau is present. Chris Stahl from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection is here. Lawrence Barrett from Florida Gateway College is not present. James Stanbury from the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity is also not present. John Grosskopf from North Florida Community College is here. Chris Reitow from Appalachia Regional Planning Council is here. Thomas Hawkins from 1000 Friends of Florida is present. Betsy Bartfield from the Jefferson County Commission is present. Ashley Stefanik from the Suwannee River Water Management District is present. Begin Hanrahan from the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services is present. And Audrey Kidwell, Volunteer Florida, is also present. I believe that summarizes everything from our roll call this morning. If anybody was mentioned as not present and is here, you could shoot an email to Ryan Asmus or let us know during Q&A. and we will be sure to mark that as such. And with that, I believe I will turn it over to Wei Wei Shen.
Good morning. I would like to take a few minutes today to set the stage for our virtual meeting discussion and for your next few meetings by summarizing the proposed framework for your recommendations and the final report. FDOT Chief Engineer Will Watts is available as well to answer questions today. The left part of this slide lists the 6 statutory purposes for MCORS. We're using these as a starting point, so all your recommendations tie back to at least one of these 6 purposes. As you look at this list, what jumps out is that most of this language is not specifically about transportation. It's about communities, the economy, the environment, and other related topics. The statute directs all of us to think about the types of communities we want in the future, and then to consider how transportation corridors can support that vision. This broad framework contemplated by the legislature allows your recommendations be about more than just how FDOT plans a specific corridor. You also could be providing recommendations about the types of conservation, land use, community development, or economic development strategies that would support a transportation corridor in addressing these purposes. This slide recaps the statutory objective for MCORS, which is a specific charge to FDOT to advance construction of corridor projects. The statute specifically sets the vision of a multimodal, multi-use corridor and provides specific capabilities for FDOT in terms of innovative approaches to right-of-way acquisition and other tools to advance this vision. So as you consider your recommendations, there are 2 related questions before you. First, how can a program of multi-use, multimodal corridor investments support the broad statutory purposes in this study area? Second, how should key partners work together to address these statutory purposes? FDOT, along with other state agencies, local governments, MPOs, RPCs, and other partners. You have seen this slide before. This is the recommendations framework to address the statutory requirements. The statute describes the responsibilities of the task force, which essentially are to provide consensus recommendations in the 3 areas. The high-level needs for a corridor in the study area. That's to answer the question, why? Guiding principles for planning and development and developing a corridor. That's about how. And then instructions for FDOT and other partners to carry out the task force's recommendations in project development and beyond. That answers the question, what's next? At each step of this process, the intent is to support your recommendations with data and ensure there is an explicit handoff to what comes next in terms of planning, project development, design, and other future steps. We introduced this framework at the first webinar in April. Let's take a few minutes to walk through each step using some examples. High-level needs essentially refer to the regional opportunities and challenges the corridor is intended to address. The needs are informed by the 6 categories of purpose and the 13 areas of benefit listed in the statute, as well as task force and public input. They're intended to be short statements of text supported by data and easily communicated with partners and the public. We are identifying high-level needs early in the process to make sure all subsequent activities tie back to the fundamental question of how a corridor addresses the unique opportunities and challenges in the study area and the broad statutory purposes. As the process moves along, we will be able to get more specific in terms of developing evaluation criteria to determine to what extent the recommended needs are met by the corridor. The high-level needs language you develop eventually will become the basis for a more formal purpose and need in the project development and environmental process. Those of you familiar with the state PD&E process or the federal NEPA process know that the formal purpose and need often is a detailed chapter with lots of supporting information. We are headed there eventually, but we don't have the specific level of detail yet. The statute reads that each task force shall evaluate the need for and the economic and environmental impacts of hurricane evacuation, impacts of, and land use impacts of the related corridor. Based on where we are in the process today, the evaluation you're able to do in terms of these needs generally is to look at available data and forecasts and provide your recommendations on how to define needs and your instructions on how to assess whether these needs are met in future planning and project development. I know that many of you would like to have more specifics now on future traffic or land use impacts. Because we're still at such a high level, it's difficult to pin these down, but we do believe that establishing the right foundation today will guide the process moving forward. These are examples of some of the types of high-level needs that you might identify for the study area, and you will have some time to look at a specific list in a few minutes. Once the high-level needs are described, we will turn to guiding principles. The guiding principles are core values that guide decision about the corridor. They are the how we develop a corridor to address the needs. They're generally short statements supported by technical notes where needed. The guiding principles help identify avoidance and attraction areas and evaluate and narrow down potential corridor path courses. They also will guide decisions about corridor location, design, mitigation, and other commitments long after your report is submitted. So far, we have looked at guiding principles in 4 categories based on the types of resource they address: natural, cultural, social, and physical. We may still use this layer of organization where needed, but we also want to start tying the guiding principles more specifically to the needs they address. So returning to one of the needs from 2 slides ago, here's one of the potential guiding principles you discussed earlier as a task force to ensure the corridor addresses the identified needs. The third step in this process is the instructions for project development and beyond. It's not enough just to recommend why and how, we also need to specify what's next. We've talked many times about the Wakaiva Task Force report. A lot of the impact of this report came from the 18 guiding principles it included, 10 on corridor location and 8 on corridor design. Most of these principles were short. For example, does not encourage or promote additional development from or already approved land uses. Include the maximum provision for bridging through strategically important wetlands. But they carry weight because they were specific and they provided instructions through related documents to project development, and they were monitored over time. The instructions are how we make the connection from guiding principles back to what FDOT or specific partners need to do next. This could mean addressing corridor location, such as the input you had already provided to use on areas a corridor should avoid or areas that should attract a corridor. It also could mean identifying existing facilities that could be enhanced or might be opportunities for co-location. It also could mean identifying connectivity gaps that may need to be addressed through a new corridor in some parts of the study area. The instructions also could go beyond these specific location decisions to note implementation strategies that should be carried forward, refined, and implemented during planning, project development, design, and other activities. For example, you might give general instruction about consistency with local land use plans today, recognizing that the details will be worked out over time as we move from a path course to a more specific alignment. Or you might, as the Wekiva Task Force did, make general statements about creating wildlife crossings or bridging wetlands and recognizing that the locations for where that happens will get detailed over time. Ultimately, the instructions communicate the intent of the task force in applying the guiding principles. This is where we also can document some of the issues that may not be fully resolved when a report is adopted, or that you want to flag as needing more attention moving forward. So let's go back to our example one more time. Based on the high-level needs and guiding principles we've discussed, here are some of the specific instructions for project development and beyond that could be developed moving forward. Let's tie everything together. Eventually, your recommendations will address 6 purposes in statute, and you will produce recommendations on high-level needs, guiding principles, and instructions related to all these topics. During our meetings to date, we've made great progress in laying the foundation to develop these recommendations. The task force has spent a lot of time learning about the study area, reviewing trends and conditions, reviewing local government comprehensive plans, and hearing from subject matter experts on topics like the environment, economic, workforce development, technology, and broadband. You also have heard from the public at every meeting. The task force has also helped review many data layers and identify potential avoidance and attraction areas so that you have information to support your recommendations. You have reviewed and provided guidance on existing facilities that could be opportunities for enhancement or co-location. And you've started a working list of high-level needs, guiding principles, and instructions that has been refined over time. Today, we will start building out this framework by row. We will take a few examples and work through left to right to define our high-level needs, guiding principles, and instructions. This is how we addressed broadband at the last meeting. We'll work through 3 more topics today. These are intended as examples to help us make progress. We'll take a more comprehensive view at the next few meetings. We will also start working through this framework by column. Today, we'll spend some time looking at the high-level needs as a set to see if we have comprehensively addressed all of the purposes. Our hope is that between today and our next meeting in July, we can reach consensus on the high-level needs. During meetings 6 through 8, we'll focus on wrapping up the guiding principles and documenting the instructions so that you're close to a final report at that time. Note that for each of these columns, we'll bring you a complete draft at one meeting, get your feedback, and then bring a revised draft at the subsequent meeting. As you can see, the schedule is aggressive. Now we're at that critical point where we need to roll up our sleeves, sharpen our pencils, and turn our thoughts into a consensus-driven report. Before I wrap up, let me briefly describe our thinking on the task force report. We anticipate the final report may be 10 to 15 pages, consistent with the length of other recent task force reports. The first 3 sections will summarize the background of the legislation, the task force membership and process, including public and agency involvement, and the study area characteristics. Staff will start drafting these sections for you to review. The 4th section is the heart of the report. Your recommendations on high-level needs, principles, and instructions. We'll work on this together over the next few meetings, and staff will format into the report the text for you. This section will focus on your specific recommendations with supporting narrative, including documenting significant concerns that are not resolved and would need to be addressed moving forward. The final section will be an action plan. This is what the task force recommends in terms of future planning and project development, as well as ongoing partner coordination, including the role of the organizations on this task force in future activities and monitoring these recommendations. This report outline would not include specific recommendations on an alignment or projects because we're still early in that process, but it would include clear guidance on how these decisions should be made. We will bring a more specific outline to your next meeting in July. We want to share this today to give you a sense of where we're headed, and also to remind you that the goal is for a consensus on the final report as a package. I know this will be challenging since getting to consensus is not easy. It'll require back and forth discussions, trade-offs, and concessions. Staff will work with you very closely and support you in every way possible, and we have experience with past task force processes to help you draft language that would get us to a consensus report. So with all that being said, I would like to open and turn it back to Greg Garrett to see if we have any questions from the task force members.
Thank you, Wei. Appreciate that excellent presentation. Just would like to remind everyone as we open up for questions, if you can, please stay self-muted during this time. But if you do have any questions or wanted to provide any comment, Wei's discussion, please use the raise hand function. All right. Going once. All right, it looks like we do not have any comments or questions on that portion of the presentation. So we're going to continue to move forward with our discussion this morning, and I'm going to hand it over to Brian Brooker to give us an update on the avoidance and attraction areas. Brian?
Good morning, everyone. At webinar number 1, we presented the process for identifying avoidance and attraction areas and requested input to task force recommendations. Following the webinar, we held technical briefings with each task force member where comments and feedback were provided on these topics, including the online GIS tool. We appreciate all the input and feedback that we've received. We will now present an update regarding the avoidance and attraction areas that have occurred since webinar number 1. Again, we appreciate all the good discussion during our technical briefings with the task force members and are actively updating the GIS tool based on the requests that were made during those briefings or from requests made throughout other task force meetings. Since this is a living tool and can be updated throughout the process, we have updated the task force number 4 comments layer grouping to reflect all of the layers that have been requested by task force members for avoidance consideration. This layer group is now called task force requests. Not all the requested layers have been updated in the tool, and some have not been included for use. We will work with those task force members that requested these layers to discuss with them why they have not been included in additional follow-up coordination prior to task force meeting number 6 next month. We have also revised some of the layer names to maintain consistency between the Southwest Central Connector and the Northern Turnpike Connector GIS tools, and added some more functionality to the tool by including the draw and measurement features. The following layers were added to the GIS tool number 2 since the first webinar. These layers can be viewed by clicking the task force request at the bottom of the tool. Waukesasa Flats, FEMA floodways, conservation easements, Sable Trail pipeline to replace the natural gas pipeline layer, critical land and water identification project or CLIP aggregated priorities model, wildlife management areas or WMAs, wetland easements held by DEP, swalettes, critical habitats, Florida forever lands, including those which are approved or listed for acquisition, and the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program layers. You can click on the same layer grouping at the bottom of the tool as was presented during webinar number 1 to find the new or updated layers to help with the categorization of those avoidance layers. We would also like to remind you that the categorization of these layers will be discussed at task force meeting number 6. If you have any questions or need further clarification on the layers in order to help facilitate this discussion, we will be reaching out to each task force member to schedule a follow-up to the previously held technical briefings. The GIS tool is a crucial piece to help link the guiding principles to the future phase implementation instructions as we look to move from the task force process into future phases of the MCORS program. Please remember that this is a living tool, and requests for updates to avoidance and attraction areas can be made and will be taken into consideration during the task force process. The GIS map number 2 can be found on the MCORS website by going to floridamcors.com and scrolling over to the Interactive Maps drop-down menu and selecting Suncoast Connector GIS map number 2. Note that this tool is also mobile friendly, which means it can be accessed through your mobile phone or other mobile devices. It is on the public MCORS website and can be accessed by the general public and task force members at any time during this process.
All right, thank you, Brian. I appreciate that update of the avoidance and attraction data layers. So just as a reminder, task force members, just to remain self-muted during our conversation. We're now going to look at the working list of the high-level needs for the study area. In Weiwei's presentation, needs were described as key regional opportunities and challenges that corridor investments and related actions are intended to address. Remember that these should tie into the 6 categories of purpose and the 13 potential benefits in the statute. So they can be transportation specific and transportation supported. These should be short statements that are supported by data. You've talked about high-level needs, especially during your in-person meetings at meeting number 3 in December, but your discussion has touched on regional challenges and opportunities at some point during every in-person and virtual meeting. To help move the discussion along, our staff has called together through the meeting notes and input, providing the input to synthesize a draft of the high-level needs for your review. We targeted keeping the list to fewer than 9 statements, and we ensured that all of them could be supported by data. Shown here are the general purpose categories as identified through the statute, as well as the discussion prior to task force meeting. So now let me briefly run through the draft high-level needs as written, and then we'll open it up for your discussion. support anticipated population and economic growth in rural and urban areas, improve connectivity for goods, freight, and visitors to external markets, protect wildlife and habitats, regional ecosystems and water resources, enhance connectivity between ecosystems and corridors, strengthen highway safety, emerging evacuation and response, improve access, ecotourism and recreational areas, enhance workforce development. This task force members, just as a reminder, if you would please self-mute. We're getting a little feedback on our end. Thank you very much. To improve connectivity to farms, manufacturing, warehousing, freight terminals, and intermodal logistics centers. Expand rural broadband infrastructure and access to broadband services. Prepare for emerging technologies such as autonomous, connected, and electric shared vehicles. So combined here for your viewing on the next slide is all of the draft high-level needs. So first we want to ask, are there any questions of clarification for staff? Is there anything that's not clear? And then second, we'd like to get your thoughts on this list as a set. Does it represent the major opportunities and challenges related to transportation in the study area? Are there significant needs that are missing? Is there anything that could raise significant concern for you? So to start the discussion and answer any questions that you may have, I'm going to turn it over to Guillermo and Greg to facilitate your thoughts and ideas. So gentlemen.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to see you all again, even in this way, even though it's only in my imagination. You can see me, and as you can see, I have a good face for radio. I just want to make sure that I send you my good wishes and hopes that you and your families are staying safe and healthy during this time. So thank you again for joining with us. And I'm sorry, I can't see that. Oh, yes. Remember to self-mute when you're not speaking. That would help us all considerably. So before we just kick off this discussion, let's remember the points that were emphasized. These high-level needs are the why. This is our intent. This is why we got together as a task force. The why, what is the intent? So let's not worry too much about the wording and really concentrate on, do these statements generally support the intent of the 6 major categories that we're trying to meet? Do they meet your intent? And with that, let's open this up for discussion. And our first person, Janet Bowman, you on?
Yes, thank you, Guillermo. I think the list pretty accurately characterizes the needs that we've talked about in our past meetings. But one thing that I particularly want to raise a concern about, since we're pairing the needs with data, and that's hurricane evacuation. Unlike broadband and some of the emerging technologies where we've had extensive discussions and data to sort of support those, we really haven't sort of delved into hurricane evacuation. So I just wanted to raise that as an issue that I'm concerned about in terms of documenting need.
Thank you. And I think that that's why our comment on strengthening highway safety, emergency evacuation and response was one of the reasons we wanted in there to generally cover that area. So thank you. Commissioner.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, just to follow up, I mean, I have questions about how great a need it is. You know, I mean, I know it's identified in the statute, but given, um, there's a focus on sheltering in place versus sheltering the community versus evacuating. So having a robust discussion of that issue. Thank you.
Okay, great, great. I get your point. Thank you so much. Anything else? Okay, if not, let's move to Commissioner Dozier, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Mr. Chair and Guillermo, please, I hope you'll forgive me. I'm actually not going to speak to the high-level needs right now. I've been really looking forward to this meeting, our first time that we can dig into these issues, have a discussion. The last few have been very interesting on broadband and other topics. But this afternoon, we've got a special commission meeting, an emergency commission meeting, because our COVID numbers are rapidly increasing in Leon County. And I'm being asked, the commission is, to make a decision on whether or not to require face masks, things like that. This is a critical need. I've got to focus on it. And as I prepared for today's meeting, it just, I find myself troubled. And I want to just say two things about this. First, the task force members and the staff, phenomenal job. We've been given a schedule and we're required to carry it out. Without other guidance from the governor, from the legislature, we're doing what we have to do. And I respect that. I want to stay involved with this. On the other hand, we're asked to create the foundation, as you said, Mr. Chair, for this project. Will have a generational impact, establish the guiding principles at a time when we're under a pandemic and we have to meet virtually without robust public involvement. Even though I agree with First Amendment Foundation and others who say we should wait to meet or wait until we can meet in person, I also just think these conversations are better, more effective when we're all sitting together. I respect all of your perspectives, and it's easier to go around the table than it is a virtual discussion. The second piece, though, is something that I've reflected on. I got a text message from a constituent who said, how can I pay attention to these issues that are coming up right now? Don't they know I'm educating my kids? We're laid off. We're dealing with all these other issues. All of us have critical issues on our plate right now. So for me to be put in a position where I have to choose between this incredibly important conversation, the phenomenal amount of work that DOT staff, our consultants have done, and spending the day listening to my constituents, to business owners before I make an incredibly difficult decision this afternoon, it's kind of an impossible choice. So I wanted to take this time to make this statement. Forgive me for going on for just a second here, to encourage everyone to reach out, the public, anyone else, to the state, to the governor, to the legislature, and ask for a little more time. This is not a decision we can make. We all know that. We've heard it from public comment in every single webinar or meeting we've had. We can't make that decision. So I hope people will ask others. For me, I wish I could stay with you today. I really want to be part of this conversation, but I have to focus on what the critical need of our community is. And frankly, I know our decision tonight will impact a whole lot of you who live and work around Leon County. So again, Mr. Chair, I felt it was important enough to share these thoughts with you. And with respect to all of you and all my colleagues and the public, I'm sorry I won't be able to be with you today. So thank you for the time and good luck.
Thank you, Commissioner. We, I think, all understand that normal is changing for all of us in our communities, and we appreciate everything that you do as a local government official and understand the gravity of the situation you're facing. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now let me call on Charles Lee. Charles, you on?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Going to the very top of your list, support anticipated population and economic growth in rural and urban areas. One of the problems I have with that statement is that it is too generic. And we have a well-defined methodology in law in Florida that every local government has activated and utilized to plan for their future growth. And it is their local government comprehensive plan that has been adopted in each of the counties involved and in all of the cities involved in this area. And it seems to me like it is necessary to tailor this statement to define what we mean by anticipated population and economic growth. It can't be random, it needs to be specific. And so my particular recommendation is that this statement be modified so as to link the anticipated population and economic growth to that which has been specifically planned for in the future land use elements of the local government comprehensive plans. That includes both statistics, it also includes mapping of future growth areas in each county and each city plan. And so that's my recommendation on that item. With regard to the issue that Janet Bowman brought up of hurricane evacuation, it is completely undefined what we mean by hurricane evacuation. At one point in our history, when I believe that our hurricane evacuation was much more structured and well managed, when Mr. Fugate was the head of our emergency processes in Florida, we clearly had a protocol that was based on need rather than fear. It was based on sea level areas that were in coastal zones that were likely to have an overwash. And those areas were prioritized for evacuation. The number of people that needed to evacuate in those circumstances was well known. What has happened in the last 8 years or so, maybe 10 years or so, is that we have drifted away from that structured policy. And so when it came to Hurricane Irma, we had a governor who was bleeding over the phone saying, everybody needs to evacuate. And we were literally evacuating people from post-Andrew constructed homes that could withstand 200-mile-an-hour winds in upland areas where there would be no flooding. And we were telling those people, get on the road, get in your car and drive.
Just stop you for a second because we got limited time.
Okay, I'm done. My point here is simply that we should not blindly assume that everyone needs to evacuate. And before we put numbers on this that lend themselves to projections into how much road we need, we really need to, as a task force, I believe, go back and demand that we clarify the hurricane evacuation need and we revisit the question of shelter in place.
Great. Let me, first of all, let me ask Will or Weiwei if they want to make a comment at this point. If not, let me get you back on focus into saying, are these general principles telling you the why and understanding what Charles just described in more specifics? My observation is that they are covered by the umbrella of the statement. So I think Charles is getting a little bit into the what, and we're just not there yet. And also to remind you that at task force meeting number 6, we'll get a chance to address this even further. So we'll certainly take all of your comments, Charles, including these ones, and see how we can improve what we've done. But generally speaking, we have an intent here of dealing with evacuation processes.
Okay, well,
So-
with regard to the first one, I really would like to see support anticipated population and economic growth as indicated by local government comprehensive plans that have been adopted. That needs to be here. We ought not to provide a window where people could be anticipating, oh, well, regardless of what we have in our plan, we're now going to talk about something else. If they want to amend their plan, that's fine. But it should be keyed directly, and the statement should be worded to link it directly to the adopted plans.
Great. Let's point well made. Will or Wei Wei, anything to add to that particular comment?
Yeah, that was a great suggestion by Charles. That's the type of comments that we're looking for, that we can refine the draft high-level needs and bring the revised set back to you at meeting number 6. And then Janet's point about how we address hurricane evacuation, we're looking for directions from the task force. Maybe we need a robust discussion on the data, and then how do we address that need at this high level at this point.
Great. Thank you, Wei Wei. Let me turn this now to Ken Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong, you there? Mr. Armstrong, Ken Armstrong?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Great. Yes, I can hear you now.
My comment is also on the first bullet. While I agree with Charles's statement that it's generic, I disagree with the solution that he proposes. To me, the first bullet is, yes, about the study area, but it's also about the rest of the state. So narrowing the first bullet to only rural and urban areas within the study area, as would be done if we took the suggestion that that we looked at land use planning by municipalities in the area, seems to me not to be consistent with the high level needs that the state has for MCORs. The only I would not use Charles's suggestion. I would simply put the word state before the word population, which would indicate that the first bullet applies to the state and obviously to any rural and urban areas within the study area, but not exclusively in the study area.
Great. Good point. I think that's an excellent point. And I think that we can stress the statement to include both. I don't think that this is an either or, that there's a state perspective as well as the local area perspective. That's an excellent comment. Anything else, Mr. Armstrong?
Well, I guess the same general comment applies down through some of the other bullets. Some of the bullets are best served by dealing only with the local area. Others, like the second bullet, improve connectivity for goods, freight, and visitors to external markets. That's not just improving connectivity for goods, freight, and visitors within the study area. It's improving connectivity for goods, freight, and services in or through the study area. So I just want to be sure that we don't lose the concept that this is part of a larger activity system, not something that is exclusively local.
And I think I'm certainly understanding your point. It really is talking about, we are all connected in the state. And so we need to make sure that those connections fit from top down, from down up, and that all of that fits together. I think we'll keep that in mind as we develop, as we look further into these principles. Thank you so much for your comments. Now let me move on to Kent Wimmer. Mr. Wimmer, you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. The state of Florida water management districts local and federal governments have acquired thousands of acres, spending hundreds of millions of dollars in this area. The third bullet point, protect wildlife and habitats, should be amended to also include, or maybe a new bullet point, to protect the public and private conservation lands that have been set aside at great public expense and are being restored. Their environmental qualities are being restored on those lands over a period of decades. Those conservation areas need to be protected as well from impacts from MCORs. And so I would like to recommend that public and private conservation lands also be added to this list, please.
Okay. Comments there, Will or Weiwei, anything? No? I think that's an excellent suggestion. Thank you, Mr. Wimmer. We have a few minutes left, and I think we spent some time talking about clarifications to these needs. Is there anything that you think it's missing? You've added some for clarification, but is there anything we missed altogether? I got Chris Wynn on next. Chris, are you on there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Wynn, are you on? Yes, we can hear you
Yes.
fine. Go ahead.
This is Chris. I'm looking at the 7th bullet that you're showing right now. That's talking about, I think the intent is improve connectivity to farms. And I would suggest, from our perspective, from a fish and wildlife standpoint, that agriculture is extremely important in terms of future protection. So I would throw out to the task force that we consider adding, improve connectivity and protect farms. So adding a protection intent into that bullet, if no one objects.
That's an excellent suggestion. We'll take that on, and as I mentioned, in task force number 6, we'll get to look at these with the revisions that you've added on today. We got a few more minutes. Any other comments on this? I actually think you're doing some really good work here, and noted and made some input that's I think critical to making this the most vital it can be for the future of Florida. Is there anything, let me go back to my question, is there anything that's missing that you, Charles Lee, go ahead. Charles?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to one reference in the avoidance area discussion. I just want to make sure you make a note that the Florida Greenways Network Priority 1 and 2 lands ought to be in that mix. I did not see them on the list of things and would recommend that they be there. Then the final comment relates to the part of what our friend, the commissioner from Tallahassee, said before she had to get off the call a moment ago. And that is that we need to be cognizant that the period of time we are in is not just a period that will end and then everything will necessarily return to normal. There are a lot of societal shifts happening, and economic patterns involving travel preferences and related things are bound to be influenced for a long period of time by the emergency situation we are in. You don't end up with people in this kind of situation for what we can anticipate will be at least a year without finding paths to permanently change their behavior. And so my crystal ball is not clear whether that definitively means that there will be less people on the road or more people on the road. If people are avoiding air travel, it may mean there are more people on the road in terms of long-term long-distance connecting corridors. But I believe that there needs to be an effort in the background by DOT to try to sense what is happening in terms of the evolution of long-term travel preferences and the number of actual wheels that are going to be on these roads, whether that goes up or down, influenced by the cultural changes we may have.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Like you, my crystal ball broke years ago, and I can't even forecast the next 15 minutes. But I know that what we've all learned is do what's in front of us. And I think right now, that's an important aspect of finishing as best we can these needs. Let me ask Will if you've got any comments you'd like to make on this, Will.
Hey, good morning, Charles. Great comments. I mean, we are going through kind of an evolution with COVID and how it affects our lifestyles and our transportation. But we just don't know. I mean, does it affect transit? Are people concerned with transit now? Are we going to telework more? See that? Definitely a yes. But, we are at a pre-planning stage of MCORs, no construction's funded. So, how do we build these guiding principles to account for any possibility in the future as needs start to grow in the future? So that's why it's important for this task force to develop the guiding principles to support the future project development and guide it. So thank you, Charles.
Hey, Charles, to add to what Will just said, what we need to do is to continue to track the travel trends. The guiding principles that's going to be developed by this task force are for the long run. MCORS as a program is going to have very long-lasting impacts on how we travel and how we support the state's environment and the economy. So the guiding principles that we develop need to be able to withstand the change of time and be long-lasting that can guide the department's work. So great comment. And also another note is that we've heard a lot of good points from members today about the list of needs. Some of the comments came up, sort of got into the guiding principles as to how we're gonna address these needs. So if you would give staff the flexibility of reflecting all these thoughts into the next draft that we present to you in your July meeting.
Thank you, Will and Weiwei. I think this concludes this portion of our discussion in this meeting. Again, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for your input in this very important area. And now we're going to move on to this.
Just real quick, before we wrap up, just wanted to remind everyone, like Weiwei said, the intent of today's discussion is to bring back a revised list to the task force in the July meeting. So just to kind of summarize, we had a couple of good comments about hurricane evacuation, and it's defining that perhaps further, and also some discussions about the first bullet about economic growth and tying to plans, and some discussion about the geographic aspects of that. There was also discussions about private and public conservation lands and farmlands and their protection in the need statements. So yeah, as Guillermo and Weiwei have illustrated, the intention is to bring those revisions back to the task force in July and continue to have further and more robust discussions in that regard. So yeah, as Guillermo mentioned, we're going to move on to the next portion of our virtual meeting this morning. Just as a quick reminder about registration for public comment period, you must register to be able to make comments during the public comment portion of today's virtual meeting. We are at 10:40 now, so any requests to comment have to be received by 11 a.m. If you have not yet registered to provide public comment during today's virtual meeting and wish to do so, please sign up on the website under today's event. If you need the link emailed to you, please use the raised hand function, and one of our team members will email you the link to sign up. Comments may also be submitted at any time to our email address, which is fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us. All right, we're going to move on to our guiding principles discussion. As previously, since we had such great discussion before, just a reminder, everyone, if you can self-mute during this portion so we don't get any feedback. And we're going to go into the next phase. So let's talk about some examples of guiding principles and instructions. In Weiwei's presentation, guiding principles were described as core values to guide decisions about corridor and regional planning and development. These are the how. They're intended to be short statements supported by technical notes where needed. We also have instructions. These were described as direction provided by the task force for future project development and implementation activities to ensure guiding principles are applied as intended. These will be a little more specific. We don't have time to cover all the guiding principles today, but we've selected 3 examples based on topics you've been discussing in recent meetings to start making progress. I'm going to briefly run through how these were developed, and then we'll open it up for discussion. For today's conversation, we've identified 3 target principles: co-location, broadband, and technology. These guiding principles are briefly highlighted with recent data and information that has supported the development of the principle thus far. Then we're going to go through how the principle integrates between the high-level needs and the instructions for future project development and implementation activities. I'm going to need to switch with you real quick for that. Bear with me for 1 second. Yeah, go one more seat, please. Okay. So perhaps one of the most prominently discussed principles for the Suncoast corridor study area has been the concept of co-location. Throughout the task force meeting, this guiding principle has been a focus of discussion for not only aspects of avoidance and minimization, but also for the opportunities for enhancement of both natural environment resources and local and regional community needs and goals. Shown on the map are a variety of resources that have been discussed and identified as opportunities for co-location. These include existing major roadways, utility lines, trails, and rail locations. So let's take a look at the guiding principle based on some of the discussions that the task force has had on co-location. As you can see in the area there, we're going to just kind of work from the slide here. The purpose categories that co-location speaks to is the revitalization of rural communities, providing regional connectivity, and to protect the environment areas. I'm sorry, I can't read this. You're going to have to bear with me 1 second. I get my computer back up here. I'm good. Okay, you need this slide. I got it. I'm good, guys. I got it. Thank you. All right, so the draft high-level needs that we're speaking to, I apologize for the delay there. Computer went to sleep. Improve regional connectivity for goods and visitors through access to a high-speed, high-capacity transportation corridor with access to external markets. Now, the draft guiding principle you see on the screen is revised based on the feedback that we received during previous meetings and webinars. And so this guiding principle that we're working from today states, when practicable, MCORs will be co-located with other existing linear corridors, including highways, electric power lines, and similar facilities. The instructions that we've received thus far from our communication with you include the following: coordinate bypass locations with local communities, coordinate interchange locations with local communities, use limited access as appropriate, consider how current infrastructure impacts can be improved, incorporate opportunities for infrastructure enhancement, and consider secondary impacts to communities. A lot of these have been reduced or condensed in their wording to fit here on the slide, but as you may recall from the meetings and discussions we've had, there were more expanded thoughts on that. So now we're going to open up for discussion to the task force to ask you for your feedback on this. Similar like we did on the high level needs, first we'll just ask if there are questions or clarifications for staff. Then we're going to move into getting your thoughts on the guiding principle language. Does it represent the conversation we've had so far? And importantly, is there anything that would raise significant concern for you? So with that being the situation, okay, and we're going to let Guillermo lead us through this discussion again. And, the first hand that we have raised on this is from Thomas. Oh, and then you put it down. You may not have
Okay.
Well, I'm happy to give a comment now, but I don't have a question for staff. It was a comment on the draft. Is that appropriate now, or should I wait?
Well, actually, it's a good point. Is there anybody that wanted to have like just before, so we can check that box? Were there any questions or clarifications for the staff on the information that was shared? And if not, we'll roll right back to you, Thomas.
Thanks. Here was my comment on the draft guiding principle that we see here on the screen. Is it uses the phrase MCORs and says when practical MCORs will be co-located with existing linear corridors. And the draft high level need is referring specifically to transportation corridors. And so I'm envisioning an outcome here where we are going to be looking at different routing for components that are broadband versus components that are roadway construction or modification. So I think in our draft guiding principle, we want to say that any of those high capacity transportation corridors should be co-located with existing highways, and then maybe any broadband should be co-located with existing power lines or similar facilities. So we're kind of, do you see the distinction that I'm making here? It seems like we're using MCORs to just refer to those roadway corridors, whereas we might not have, MCORs may itself comprise multiple corridors. So I think that language should be more clear. And then in this draft guiding principle, specifically regarding the transportation corridors, I think we should raise that word practical to feasible. We really should be striving to have MCORs co-located with existing roadway facilities whenever feasible. So to the extent that we can, MCORs should occupy existing built roadway corridors. And that's both because that's going to be economically most feasible and because it's going to lead to the least amount of impact on environmental resources and existing communities.
Those are good points, Thomas. Will or Wei, do you want to make a comment on this?
So Thomas, kind of give us an example if you wanted to reword that guiding principle, just to step us through it.
I would say that the draft guiding principle should read, when feasible, high capacity transportation corridors should be co-located with other existing linear transportation corridors, including highways. And then we should have a separate draft guiding principle that relates to other infrastructure, such as broadband, that might have the same corridor as a transportation facility, but might have a different corridor than a transportation facility, depending on what our actual planning shows is the need to connect. Our point A's and point B's, you can't get from here to there, are going to be different for broadband than they are for roads.
Wei, do you have anything you want to add, or Will, any further comment?
I get your point, Tom. So broadband can take a multiple paths. I think that's your point.
Exactly.
Thomas, great comments. What we're gonna do at meeting number 6 is that we're gonna bring you back the draft guiding principles as a comprehensive set, and then we'll focus on discussing where we have general consensus, where we need more discussion. So these are great for staff to get that draft ready for you guys.
Great. Thanks so much, Will. Thanks, Wei. And thank you, Guillermo.
Thanks, Thomas. What I also wanted to bring back everyone to the needs discussion is to demonstrate to you how this works. You have the purpose and the high level needs, and then how the guiding principles support that. So you could see the why and now the how. And so some of the comments that were made in the last discussion, this is how we would work to put them in support of the high level needs. So with that, let me then turn this, Charles Lee, are you on, Charles?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think it's important that we recognize that all existing linear corridors are not equal in terms of their potential for co-location. If we were looking at putting a 4 to 6 lane MCORS facility where you now have a 25-foot wide narrow 2-lane road, in my mind, that is not genuine co-location. And so I have sent you some recommendations in writing on this during our earlier exchanges and the in-person meeting. And I think that the text of this needs to be clarified so that we are talking about major linear corridors. And my own definition of what a major linear corridor would look like is that it would be an existing right-of-way that's at least 200 feet in width with a 4-lane divided public highway or a 250 kilovolt or larger power line infrastructure already present. Again, all power lines are not co-equal. If you have just a little local feeder line of some kind, that is not justification for co-location, but clearly a 250 kV or a 500 kV could be. And so I think you need to add some dimensions to what we mean by co-location, that it needs to be major facilities, not little tiny things.
Yep, Charles, we hear you. And thank you for helping me to illustrate what's a guiding principle and what are some potential draft instructions. So let's think about what is the high level principle value that we want to have shown in the guiding principles, and then also go a step beyond to give DOT and our partners instructions as to how to get all these things done. So great points, and we'll weave these thoughts into the next draft when we meet in July.
You should at least say in this principle major, and I would prefer that you actually had some dimensions on it relating to the width of existing corridors.
Will, do you have anything you want to add to the discussion?
No, great point, Charles. You know, even if we look at US 19, there may be some areas less than 200 feet. So that's that's a finite detail, but I think we can craft your message where the point is made, though.
Excellent points, Charles. I do think that beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So I think the definition of a mayor corridor is going to be different in every individual. So I think we will try and capture this large umbrella that covers your definition as well as that of others. Let me, before I move on to the next person, just ask any of our local commissioners if you have any comments you'd like to make, and if so, please raise your hand on that. And while you're doing that, let me ask Kent Wimmer to go ahead and make your statements, Mr. Wimmer.
Good morning, Kent Wimmer. My comment goes to co-location. The study areas were defined based on political boundaries. And I think by doing that, we're not purposefully looking at co-location opportunities that exist. And when you look at the PD&E and looking at what the needs that's actually trying to be resolved, like the traffic on I-75, there are corridors out there, including US 41, State Road 44, State Road 484, State Road 40, which could be and should be considered as co-location alternatives. I'm looking at the map you have online. It's different than the map that was flashed on the screen, you know, as far as the co-location opportunities. But, you know, in fairness to, you know, serving the needs, you know, is what the high level needs are. One of the objectives, you know, I believe that our task forces are not being given the full universe or suite of co-location opportunities that need to be considered to make this an effective process. Thank you.
Kent, we
Go ahead,
plan we plan to have a more robust discussion on co-location and connecting gaps at our July task force meeting. We get your point. So stay tuned for more information and discussion on that topic.
Thank you very much.
Well, again, remember that we're moving from the why to the how, and there's still the what to come. And these first two steps inform the next ones. So we don't have anyone else ready to comment. So we'd like to, if all right with all of you, let's move on to the next guiding principle. So Greg.
All right, thank you, Guillermo. In previous webinars, we discussed broadband needs and opportunities. Here we are illustrating some of the data to support broadband needs in the study area. This and additional data can also be viewed in the GIS tool. Now, if I may, I'm going to roll on to the discussion on the broadband guiding principle. Here we see that it speaks again to three of the purpose categories: revitalize rural communities, encourage job creation, and to leverage technology. The draft high-level needs that broadband speaks to is to expand rural broadband infrastructure and access to broadband service. The updated guiding principle for discussion this morning states: plan and design enhanced or new corridors to enable co-location of broadband infrastructure in right-of-way, and ensure broadband provider access to FDOT right-of-way is non-discriminatory and competitively neutral. Some of the draft instructions that we've heard from the task force in prior meetings regarding broadband include: assist in providing broadband for schools, libraries, and other civic buildings. Provide corridors wide enough to include space for multiple broadband providers. Consider future technology and sustainability. Set measurable standards for broadband, and consult with local communities on providing broadband to areas where it is or will be needed the most. So again, same dance as before. We'll start asking if there are any questions or clarifications simply on the material or what's been provided. And then, as we have before, we'll open up to a broader discussion on the guiding principle as shown.
Let me, before we do that, Will or Weiwei, do you want to add any comments to this guiding principle?
The only thing I would add is that, our palette of being able to support other improvements or other enhancements with MCORS is a great opportunity. So we are going to get some additional funding for broadband, and we're excited to see how we can use that to expand and work on help support the master plan for broadband in Florida.
And also, this is a great example of a guiding principle that would involve some partner actions as well. DEO is taking the lead on a lot of the broadband initiatives. The department, we have our role, and we're also going to be supporting DEO. So if we have guiding principle and instructions for DEO, being a bit broader as to what we need to do to support our communities, it's all that stuff can go into the report.
Thank you, Weiwei. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, real quick before we open up, we just hadn't heard this morning from any of our local representatives. And I know from the prior meetings and listening to the discussions, there was, particularly as we spoke to broadband, there was some different unique and interesting inputs that came from there. So just before we open it up more broadly as we have previously, I just wanted to ask, Betsy Barfield or Ronald or our Scotts, Carnahan and Coons, if you guys had any considerations or thoughts on this as it speaks from your local community.
Go ahead, Betsy.
Go ahead.
Not very well.
First and come back.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so I continue to be concerned about the broadband part of all of this and the cost and how that is being organized.
Will, or do you want to comment on that?
You go ahead, Wei.
Go ahead, Wei. Do you?
Betsy, Commissioner Barfield, I didn't hear the whole question. Did you trail off about you're concerned about the cost of broadband?
Commissioner?
Yeah, you can hear her, but she's very muted.
You're still quite muted. I think if I understood your point, you were wondering how the DOT is coordinating with the broadband companies in this.
Ronald has his hands up.
Okay, well, we work on those technical difficulties. Commissioner Kitchen?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, excellent discussion. When you talked about the slide before this, I think under draft instructions, virtually all of them talked about local community input, and then also this talks about local consult with local communities. So I was anxious, as always, to hear what the elected officials from the local communities, particularly north, might have to add to this. I'll just once again say, from our perspective, Citrus County has had many years to prepare for the continuation of the Suncoast Parkway through Citrus County, and that's led to a lot of public discussion about some of the same issues that are being discussed today. And when those concerns came up, I went to the communities south of us, Hernando and Pasco, and talked to those communities down there in regards to the concerns that I was hearing in our community. And as an example, somebody said, well, it'll cut our community in half, it'll change the character of our county, and so on and so forth. And in talking with the commissioners that have had the experience of having the Suncoast built through their community, that wasn't the case. So I was able to take specific questions to communities that already have the parkway. I'm just thinking that this is a great opportunity for the commissioners north of Citrus County to do the same thing, to talk, maybe go down or make arrangements to talk to commissioners or take specific questions down to see if these concerns, some are valid, some are not, some were addressed or whatever. I know in Citrus County, DOT was excellent in working with us. We had some major concerns about wellheads and taking care of pristine environmental areas, and DOT was excellent with working on those issues. So I guess my long-winded statement is I continue to always remain interested in what the elected people north of Citrus County have to say about these issues.
Thank you. Will, Wei, anything there that you care to enlighten us on? You good?
No, that's a good example of using other data sources to formulate and support the right guiding principle language. So appreciate that. That's a good insight.
Before I move on, just want to make sure, Commissioner Barfield, did we fix your technical problems? I realize I just asked that question, is if you can't hear me, can you say so? But we'll keep working on that. In the meantime, Thomas Hawkins. Thomas?
All right, thank you, Guillermo. I was muted. I want to note that we have different construction of this guiding principle in terms of the verbs that we use. than in the previous one. So in the previous guiding principle, where I believe we're talking about transportation corridors, we simply say the corridors will. Here, instead, we're saying plan and design corridors. And the language is much less affirmative and direct. And I think that where we're headed is that broadband is playing second fiddle to transportation infrastructure. And I think that that's the wrong approach. I really think that in terms of bang for our buck, we get so much out of broadband. It is such a valuable utility for folks, and we really need it in our rural areas. We should use the same language describing broadband that we do describing our transportation facilities. We should say that we will have these corridors. We will have the broadband. Instead of saying that we're going to assist in providing broadband to schools, our instructions should be that we will provide broadband to schools, libraries, and other state buildings. We really need to change the efficacy of this language, whether it's direction to FDOT or DEO. It needs to be direct and affirmative in the same way that we've drafted our principles and our instructions related to other infrastructure.
Thomas, this is Whaley. You provided an excellent point. The broadband is needed by our rural communities, whether FDOT takes the lead or DEO takes the lead, the need is there. We can change the verb of the guiding principle to make it much more affirmative, like what you just talked about. And then, the broadband, it's like what Will presented at our last webinar. It's a new issue for DOT, and we're working through it. So I think the way we had the verbs saying plan and design and support is that transportation facilities, in our activities in planning and designing our transportation corridors, we're going to support and expedite the broadband, but we can go back and change the verb and make it a lot more affirmative, as what you talked about.
Thank you, Wei.
And I think, Thomas, what you're trying to get to is not having to wait till full corridor build out for broadband. And I think we all agree with that. So, planning and design to accommodate broadband. Could broadband be placed earlier than full build out? I don't see why not, right? So some of the guiding principles could promote that advancement in the schedule, in the production, and in the corridor development.
Will, I 100% agree with that, but let me comment a little bit on end goal. Let me give another hypothetical. Let's say we crunch our numbers on cost feasibility and the estimated trip counts don't show that a new roadway meets our test for selling turnpike bonds in the statute. But we run that same analysis and we see that we can build broadband infrastructure and the end consumer will pay enough to meet a test for selling bonds to build that infrastructure. The statute anticipates those funding sources being available for broadband, and I just hate to see broadband being contingent upon the other. The statute says that it's worthwhile infrastructure to develop of its own accord, and we need to make sure that as we plan, we give it that lead role, not that secondary role, a co-leading role, not a secondary role.
No, I
think I agree with your clarification too, Will. Thank you.
Okay, Will, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I think we're on the same page. It's making sure whatever we do in the planning and design phase could accommodate both, and if one advances before the other because they're cost feasible. So that is the plan.
Okay. Thomas, that addresses I think addresses well what you just mentioned. So let me try see if we were able to get Commissioner Barfield on her phone. Commissioner? Okay, we'll keep trying. In the meantime, let's move on to Chris Bailey. Chris?
Hi, good morning. Chris Bailey, representing Florida Internet and Television Association. I just want to say I think this is an excellent guiding principle.
anything that we can do to remove the barriers for broadband providers to invest is certainly a good way for us to be a part of this project and continue moving this forward. I did kind of hear a little bit of what Commissioner Barfield was saying, and I think she was talking about the affordability of internet. And I just wanted to say, as a broadband provider, I believe most, if not all, broadband providers do have some sort of internet assistance program that affords users who may qualify a low-cost internet program that would be consistent with the speed set by the FCC.
Okay. Any comment?
Thanks for that clarification. I think the cost affordability issue can be addressed when we provide instructions for project development and beyond, making sure that broadband is provided at an affordable price to the rural area communities.
Great. We got to move on to a third guiding principle, and I think we're going to try and leave it open for Commissioner Barfield if she can, if we can find a connection, and we will interject if she is able to do so, so we can make sure that we have her input. Let me turn it back to Greg so that we can move on then to our third guiding principle we wanted to cover today. Greg?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Guillermo. For our third and final guiding principle to discuss today, we're going to talk about technology. As you heard in webinar number 2, there's a number of emerging technologies that can bring benefits to the corridor and surrounding communities. What you see here are just a few examples of how a connected corridor can enable traffic management, environmental preservation, health and safety applications, and real-time data for more cost-efficient infrastructure maintenance. There's also opportunities for innovative uses of right-of-way as well as energy efficiencies. So leveraging technological innovation allows for a greater return on investment through a future embracing approach. So let's take a look at the guiding principles that's been developed for technology. As you can imagine, the purpose here is to leverage technology. The high-level needs which this speaks to is to leverage and prepare for emerging technologies such as autonomous, connected, electric and shared vehicles. The updated draft guiding principle states, work with private and public sector on opportunities for technology and enhancements along the corridor, and strive to minimize impacts through innovative technology and planning and design strategies. Instructions regarding technology have included consulting with local communities on their needs, to leverage existing technology to help minimize impacts, consider how future and emerging technologies may also be accommodated, and to use technology to assist in providing safety enhancements. Are there questions from the task force or regarding clarification on this, on any of this? And if there is none, then we'll move into just thoughts about the guiding principle language.
Let me ask Will or Weiwei if there's anything you want to add before we move it to open discussion to this particular guiding principle.
The leveraging technology purpose is sort of an overarching theme. So we can do, the technology is not going to solve all our issues, but it's overarching. And if we leverage technology in the right method, we can solve a lot of our issues, and then also improve safety and mobility for our users. So just be broad when you think about the leveraging technology guiding principles.
Okay. Okay. Janet Bowman, I got you on the line here.
Yeah, so this is to follow up of Weiwei, you were sort of addressing my concern, which, I think this all needs to be couched in terms of meeting the goals of the transportation system, as opposed to having technology being a goal in itself. So I would add something to the end of the high level need, something to the effect to, meet safety, mobility, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, whatever the overall goals. I really feel strongly that we shouldn't be planning for technology just for technology's sake. I mean, we should be planning for technology in a way that meets the objectives of the transportation system.
Wait.
Yes, Janet, thank you for that point. We'll make sure that we do the revision for your next draft.
You know, if I can make a quick observation about technology, is that Charles Lee's comment about looking to the future and how uncertain it is right now, I think technology would be one of those things that helps us adjust to that future. Let me go to Ken Armstrong.
My comment is also about the draft high-level needs box. I realized that if you didn't give the example, the such as, then it really just ends up looking the same as the purpose box, basically. But if you are going to give examples, I would suggest you give at least 2 examples, one from transportation, the way you have here, and one from some other field besides transportation, where we think we're going to be able to leverage technology.
Okay.
Ken, are you talking about maybe 5G, that type of stuff, just general technology, not just limit to the transportation technology, correct?
Yes, if you're going to give an example, I would give more than one, so that it doesn't make it look like really transportation is the only place that we're looking at leveraging technology.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Will, you want to make a comment here?
No, that I think Ken just reinforces the vision for MCORs and being able to capture many aspects when we develop the corridor. So great comment, Ken.
Great. Let me then move on to Charles Lee. Charles?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think one of the greatest potentials and need for the application of these technological advancements is unfortunately not mentioned here, but viewing the Suncoast potentially as a co-location project. Hello?
Hello, can I help you?
Charles, you're still on. We can still hear you.
I'm not sure what that's about. In any event, viewing the co-location potential of the Suncoast project on US 19, one of the critical needs is going to be to determine if technology is available for what I would describe as differential tolling. And by differential tolling, I mean the ability of a vehicle with an address associated with a transponder in the locality along US 19, whether that be Perry or Cross City or any of the other urban areas that are there, to be able to use sections of US 19 without paying a toll, whereas those coming in through traffic would pay a toll. And I think that is going to make a critical difference in construction cost. Unfortunately, when the Wekiva Parkway was designed, those technologies were not available. And as a result, somewhere between $300 and $400 million of additional cost were added in order to supply non-tolled lanes, some of which had to be on bridge structures, very expensive. But if it could be done electronically, we could avoid that expense, and we could also avoid quite a bit of environmental impact. So I would urge that it be referenced as a potential for differential tolling, and I would also urge that a deep dive be taken into this by DOT as one of the primary ways that we could make co-location really function smoothly on the Suncoast project.
Charles,
Okay.
that's a great point.
ahead.
We need to differentiate between the local trips using the facility and the through trips. So we could work that either into the guiding principle or as a very explicit instruction. So
Yeah.
thank you for that reminder.
Yeah, and just to go a bit further on that, it would also be potentially feasible if you had a local customer who would otherwise be toll exempt, use US 19. Let's say they were traveling from Perry to Miami. And so they used US 19 and they got down to the point where they got on it to Suncoast, let's say at red level, and they went south on Suncoast. At the point they crossed into the rest of the Turnpike domain and tripped a transponder there, in that case, their whole trip would rack up as tolled. Whereas opposed to that same driver, if they were driving on US 19, let's say from Perry to Cross City and back, they would not be tolled. And I think the electronics are capable of making those distinctions, but it would just make a tremendous difference in how this would function very transparently and very smoothly.
From the task force level, we need to document that thought and make sure it's carried through. And then at the PD&E level, when we have more detailed analysis, we're going to be able to analyze the percentage of trips that are through, the percentages of trips that's expected to be local. So great point. It shows, from guiding principle to draft instructions, everything's going to go to be carried beyond just the task force report. It's going into future phases of your project development.
That's a good point, Wei Wei. Will, anything you want to add?
So what Charles was trying to do is leverage technology to try to be cost effective in our approach and allow connectivity with local trips versus long trips. So that is great insight. I know he's brought this up before, especially when we're talking about frontage roads and those decision points when we get into design. So great points, Charles. It's something we need to look into and use that technology to make any improvements cost effective.
And I think it's fair to say, by the way, that the pictures that we showed of technology are not all inclusive. And obviously new technology would be coming on. And I think that we will all be coordinating that into this work, and the guiding principle would cover for that. Like my favorite technology is not on there, Beam Me Across Town Scotty. So all of those things I think are, we know that this is a developing area. I want to see if we can have, interrupt the discussion and see if we can have Commissioner Barfield on here. Commissioner, are you on? If not, Chris Nguyen, are you ready to speak? Chris?
Oh, Chris, looks
Oh,
like
Chris, are you self-muted?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Sorry. Just a real quick comment in the draft instructions box. The second bullet there is talking about leveraging technology to minimize impacts. That's good. I'd also ask us to think about using technology to leverage new opportunities specific to fish and wildlife as we think forward on this this draft instruction box. Thanks.
Hey, Will, Wei Wei, any comments? No.
Another good comment.
Go ahead, Will. Sorry.
No, another good comment. I think that's come up before, how we can use technology to minimize conflict. So we've got to explore that as well.
I think Chris's comments also paint this larger picture of we can use technology to basically connect us with all aspects of what affects the region. So I think that's the wonderful thing about this particular guiding principle. Betsy, Commissioner Barfield.
Yes.
Are you there?
I am.
Oh, great.
Can you hear me?
Okay. You want to go ahead and make your comments?
I think you did get the gist of my comment, and it was answered really well. Just continue to know that in our super rural areas, Jefferson, Dixie, Taylor, that more now than ever, that connectivity is so important with broadband, and we are working diligently on our end to make that connectivity. But I do want that to be a high level priority for part of this corridor, particularly in our northern area.
Thank you. We apologize for the technical difficulties, but grateful that you could come on. Will or Wei Wei, you want to, I know you addressed this, you want to summarize it real quickly? Or Commissioner Barfield?
Yeah, we definitely support the need and figuring out solutions, how we can advance broadband before, during corridor development. So we're all on board trying to find solutions. I think part of the question was how we're going to partner. And certainly you heard Brad Swanson leading part of the charge to be at the table, as well as the last mile providers as well. So I think what's different in the past is DOT is going to be an active partner in that solution. So it's good.
And I think, Will, you had also mentioned about that it would be a priority along with the transportation needs as well. So this is comprehensive connectivity, which is an excellent point.
Yeah, I'm so glad to see the emerging consensus on broadband and the importance of partnerships amongst DOT, private, and public partners. So we'll make sure that it gets, we'll revise it and get it back to you for your final approval at our next meeting.
Okay, well, we're reaching the bewitching hour, and I want Greg to summarize the comments. But first of all, I wanted to congratulate you all on a successful discussion. And I think this is exciting to see this work move ahead and really start dealing with the why and the how. So congratulations to you all, and I think we look forward to further discussions in Task Force number 6. Greg, you want to wrap this up?
Thank you, Guillermo. Thank you to the task force members and staff for this very robust discussion on these guiding principles. We're going to roll into our next steps with our chair, Jason Peters, and then after that, we'll go into our public comment period. So, Mr. Jason Peters.
Okay, thank you, Greg, and thank you, Task Force team. I really appreciate the dialogue and the conversation. So I wanted to recap a couple of things. As we move in the next steps, I'd like to recap and state that, as we move into our public comment period, that first, today's presentation and webinar recordings will be posted on the website. Secondly, we will continue to be available to address any technical questions you have throughout this process. And finally, we want to be in touch with you to solidify the timing and the format of the July meetings. At that time, we will now hear comments from members of the public who are on the webinar with us today. And so I will turn this back over to you, Greg. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. This will conclude our formal presentation for the day. We are going to move on to the public comment period of our virtual meeting. I would like to continue to emphasize how important this input is to the process, and that public comment during our meetings is only one way for the public to provide their input to us. Public comments may be submitted at any time to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us and will become part of the public record. Let's now hear comments from the members of the public who registered to speak and are present at the virtual meeting today. We have approximately 1 hour of public comments from those members that are currently registered. As always, we encourage everyone to stay engaged during this portion of the virtual meeting. And just again, request to comments that were received by 11 were included. If you did not respond when you were called, we'll provide a second chance at the end of the public comment period. When your name is called to actually speak, we will unmute your line in order for you to provide comment within your allotted time of 3 minutes. You will hear a tone when you have 30 seconds remaining, and then another tone when your time is up. The line will be muted after 3 minutes, so please keep your eye on the clock and listen for the tones. If you have more information to share with the group, you can provide additional comments in writing for further instructions. And you can also send comments anytime to the email provided. Only one person at a time will be unmuted. If you have self-muted, please be sure to unmute before speaking. And it looks like our first 3 speakers that we are going to identify for the public comment period will be Lindsay Cross, Herman Younger, and Neil Fleckenstein.
Lindsay Cross, you are unmuted.
Thank you. Good morning. This is Lindsay Cross with Florida Conservation Voters. I know that we are living in unusual times and we're all trying to navigate how to operate safely and effectively. DOT, I recognize that you have made modifications to the format today, so thank you for that. However, aggressively continuing with the webinars and task force meetings at this time is not sufficient for receiving feedback from task force and community members, nor is it appropriate for advancing an issue that will impact our economic, physical, and community landscape for decades to come. Today, I'd like to ask DOT staff and consultants if you are truly doing the best you can to involve the public in this process in a meaningful way, or if you're merely going through bureaucratic checkboxes. It is your job, DOT, to conduct this process in a way that conforms with the sunshine requirements. I'd argue that you should be going above and beyond the letter of the law to seek ways to build trust in communities. Instead, your actions show that you are not sensitive to our global current priorities. We know from verbal comments received at in-person meetings and on these webinars that the public is overwhelmingly against these roads. We have a pretty good idea what the thousands of emails to DOT listens have said, and that is to not build these roads. But that is only because concerned organizations have made public records requests using the Freedom of Information Act. Just yesterday, the Center for Biological Diversity made another records request for public comments from February through this month. You've noted that task force members will receive these comments in July, but there has been no meaningful attempt to collate and categorize these in a way that is accessible and digestible to the public. One member of the public on a recent webinar referred to this email depository as a black hole. So while it may be enough to merely set up an email portal or give out a flash drive, shouldn't you be doing more than the bare minimum? For any members of the public interested in attending this meeting, they would not have received electronic notice until 5 p.m. on Friday afternoon. You also sent out notices for the other webinars this week on Saturday and Sunday evenings. I wonder how many members of the public were scouring their emails on Father's Day for a notification from DOT. And up until nearly 5 p.m. yesterday, there was no agenda posted for this meeting. This makes it exceedingly difficult for the public to be informed and prepare those comments. I'll also reference the lack of transparency on the enormous cost to taxpayers if these roads are built. Our budget shortfall will be in the billions of dollars this year, which is why 80 organizations, including Florida Conservation Voters, have called on Governor DeSantis to redirect the $90 million in this year's budget away from MCORs and into actual needs facing everyday Floridians, like protecting their health and economic future. I challenge you to do better. As Commissioner Dozar noted so authentically, there are critical issues that the task force members, including our elected officials, are wrestling with. We've asked you to put the brakes on this process, and I will make that request to you again today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cross, for your comment. Up next, Neil Fleckenstein. You are unmuted.
Neil Fleckenstein, Tall Timbers Research Station. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate Commissioner Dozier's comments. I thought she was just spot on, given what we're dealing with in the state in terms of COVID and the rapidly rising case counts. It makes it very difficult, I think, for the public and for the elected officials to focus on this issue. I think DOT is trying to do a good job on the technology. The challenge we have, though, is I know we had really good, robust conversations in person among task force members, and that is just simply not possible on the webinars. And given the importance of the Suncoast Connector project, the impacts along that across that corridor, I'm very concerned about the lack of robust conversation and interchange among all of the task force members as well as the public. I think Lindsay referenced the issue about agendas. Yeah, I wasn't able to access an agenda until about 4:30 yesterday afternoon for a meeting today, and I'm sure that agenda had to have been ready, well in advance of less than 24 hours before the meeting. Having those agendas a week ahead of time would really allow folks, the public, to determine if they're interested and they want to attend and participate. And you really can't do that with less than 24 hours notice. So I would really encourage you to try and get those out a little quicker. I think Commissioner Dozier and a couple of others mentioned just data needs. I know you all have compiled an enormous amount of data, and you've got a Herculean task that you've been able to, or that you're tasked with. But we do still have really important data needs out there. The evacuation needs, I think Thomas Hawkins brought that out. That's a spot on point, having data for the evacuation need. I think, we saw good data on broadband and the lack of broadband access. I'm surprised we haven't seen anything in regard to transportation need, though, in this corridor. So much of this is focused on the transportation needs along, say, US 19, but we've seen nothing in regards to transportation data. I know from just looking at the raw data that traffic volume on US 19 is about 16% of the maximum service volume on that roadway. I think at some point that has to play into this conversation. We do know there are lots of other needs, though. I think everybody agrees that broadband is absolutely crucial, and it's something that really can be separated from a toll road. I think the transportation data will show that there's not a lot of transportation need for this in such rural communities, but separating out the broadband, which is a crucial issue, I think is vitally important for us to do, and I encourage you to look forward to doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fleckenstein, for your comment. Up next, Herman Younger.
Hello, my name is Herman Younger. I'm an organizing representative with the Sierra Club. Task force members, we find ourselves in unprecedented times of great uncertainty. Businesses are suffering, and our healthcare and education industries are lacking adequate funding and resources as a result of COVID-19. As task force members, you represent some of these very sectors that are in serious need of government assistance. I ask you today to act with your consciousness and urge Governor DeSantis to strike the $90 million in funding for MCORS for the 2020-2021 budget so that funding can be redirected to help the unemployed, small businesses, agricultural producers and workers, and other Floridians hit hard by COVID-19 and its repercussions. Our essential industries and services cannot afford to suffer due to the funding of this destructive, unnecessary toll road project. Please act with urgency and make your position against this waste of taxpayer dollars known to the public today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Younger. Up next is Mary Lou Foster from Lamont, Florida. Mary Lou, you're unmuted.
Yes, I just want to say that I agree wholeheartedly with absolutely everything that the public comments, people who have commented publicly so far. There's no need for enhanced transportation. I get it for the broadband, but there's no need. I also agree that this process should definitely be put on hold. There's no need for us to continue with this in this manner until we get past the pandemic stage. of our lives. And I just implore you, I don't know why, I agree with Commissioner Dozier, I don't know why you're doing this if it's just to check bureaucratic boxes. And there's got to be a way to put it on hold or just don't do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Foster. Up next is Eugene Kelly. Eugene Kelly from Brooksville, Florida, you are unmuted.
Thank you. I'm Eugene Kelly, speaking for the Florida Native Plant Society. I would like to start by acknowledging a comment that was made by Task Force member Chris Wynn earlier. He was mentioning the importance of farmland and other agricultural land within the study area. And that's something I've been emphasizing throughout this process. I'm assuming that as a representative of the Fish and Wildlife Commissioner, Mr. Wynn was thinking largely of the habitat values associated with those lands, and certainly that is extremely significant. I'd like to kind of shift also to the importance economically of agriculture within this region. One of your earlier meetings, in-person meetings, included a panel discussion that included Dr. Gina Mastro de Casa from the University of Florida IFAS, and she provided you some pretty eye-opening information on the economic value of agriculture within the study area. Across the 8 counties within that area, it's about $2.3 billion a year based on the 2017 data. An average of 24% of the workforce within those 8 counties, those jobs are related directly with agricultural enterprises. I've been looking at that importance in another way that I would really like the task force to consider in the future. I've been thinking about farm bill spending. And in Florida alone, $165 billion of output from agriculture alludes to the overall significance of it. But the Farm Bill is there to increase the sustainability and the environmental values of agriculture, make it more environmentally friendly, increase habitat values for wildlife. And while I can't provide you accurate information on by county Farm Bill spending, I'm going to work to dig that information out for you. But I can tell you that just last year, fiscal year 2019, $86 million were spent on Farm Bill programs across the state of Florida. That was actually a short year. It's averaged $127 million a year for the last 15 years. The next time I talk to you, I really want to give you information by county so that you can see specifically how that breaks down across the entire study area.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly, for your comment. Up next, Amy Datz from Tallahassee, Florida. Amy, you are unmuted.
FDOT has a long, successful history of coordinating with NGOs and other state and federal agencies. This project will be a great example of their willingness to incorporate the many multifaceted needs and requirements of their partners and stakeholders in this project development. Public and private partnerships have been a mainstay of government since the American Revolution and are one of the many reasons this country and state are so successful. They will make this project better. One overriding need in the future, 10, 20, 50 years and beyond, is sea level rise. Yesterday, it was reported that there will be, for the next 2 weeks, over 100 degrees within the Arctic Circle near Siberia. US 19 and I-95 may be underwater before this project is finished. The 79% of Floridians living on the coast will move inland and north to higher ground. Because of this movement of goods, services, and people will be needed for new and innovative ways to move around the state and to access the rest of the country. This roadway has that potential to address these issues. There will be enough right-of-way so that I foresee electric trains and buses traveling on these roads, charged by solar-powered strips in the road and portable solar-powered charging stations for trucks and personal vehicles at staging and rest areas. The co-location of multimodal systems will be a tremendous environmental opportunity for our state. In terms of avoidance and attraction layers, for avoidance, avoid areas where endangered wildlife habitat will be compromised. Study roadkill statistics to identify where wildlife crossings will be most effective. Florida DOT has already won many national and international awards for their work in this area. Study areas where potential flooding may occur and develop a standard for location in areas of higher elevation. Study major areas of congestion and then determine the best alignment that will reduce congestion and therefore air pollution. Currently, the connection with Suncoast, I-4, and I-275 are some of the worst congested areas in the nation and need improvement. Please design the connection between the Suncoast and the new Southwest Corridor, be it a smoother, more efficient connection. The trucking industry loses $5 billion a year in congestion, passing the cost on to Floridians. It is an industry that must help plan ways to move and store their trucks with congestion reduction as a priority. Study hurricane evacuation patterns and locate, design, and build this roadway to allow the most efficient and effective evacuation plan. Co-locate infrastructure in the waterway to reduce environmental impacts in the broader areas surrounding the roadway. Determine the highest child poverty and unemployment so that residents gain the greatest benefit by training addressed in the bill.
Thank you, Mrs. Datz, for your comment. Up next is Sally Petronas from Tallahassee, Florida. Sally, you are unmuted.
Thank you very much. I'm Sally Petronas. I'm the president of Avoidance for Better Transportation, which is a 33-year-old nonprofit advocacy group for transportation issues in the state of Florida. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to weigh in. We have already been on record with substantive comments a number of times on this and other quarters that are in this initiative. So I wanted to weigh in again today to say FBT continues to support this initiative to strengthen and enhance Florida's essential infrastructure that makes this a high quality of life state and economically vibrant going forward into the future. These discussions regarding the new multi-use corridors are based on the needs of our high growth state. And we have been having and evolving these discussions for the last 20 years. I personally was a part of some of the early discussions in the late 90s. And so this is not a new topic. It's not something that we've just come to lately. And it's based on real needs and on real data. In view of the unprecedented history that we're facing, time in history we're facing right now, that's been brought on by the global pandemic, I felt that it was important to weigh in at least our voice of support again. And my main message today is simply please remain vigilant in maintaining the long view of what these imports can bring to the state of Florida as a whole. And remember that Florida's future is at stake, and we need to deliberate based on data-driven for long-term needs, and don't be tempted to think short-term based on this unprecedented time that we're living in. In many ways, the pandemic has further spotlighted the critical needs that were originally spawned out of this initiative. We trust DOT to be good stewards of this initiative, and they listen and they behave professionally when they deliberate and present the outcomes of these. A lot of discussion about not doing this virtually and all. I would say that if I have heard one message strong out of this whole time that we're living in, it is that going forward, the world will be more virtual than real in most cases, and in that regard, so much of the workforce is going to be staying in home and doing business virtually, whether you're buying food or you're buying or changing policies going forward. I think this is going to be the way we're going to be working in the future. And just had a long discussion, not 30 minutes ago, with someone about a leader of a state agency in that regard. So I would encourage you to please, again, long-term, and I thank you, DOT, for your vigilance in moving forward on this. I think it's something that is important for my children, my grandchildren, and the future generations of Floridians. So with that, I'll close.
Thank you, Mrs. Petronas. Up next is Kristen Rubin from High Springs, Florida. Kristen, you are unmuted.
Hi, my name is Kristen Rubin. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can. Go ahead.
I'm with our Santa Fe River. And firstly, why during a time when just the state of Florida is surpassing 100,000 cases of COVID, are we having virtual meetings for a road that is ultimately, to me, not even needed at this time in our lives? These roads make no sense unless you are the people that will be making money. I've listened to these webinars about guiding principles, high-level needs, broadband, and many other distractions. Where are the guiding principles for humanity? Where are the solutions for high-level needs? Or really, what are those needs? And who are they for? Why do we need new roads for broadband when there are states using existing roads and electric utilities for new broadband? Doesn't make sense. This planet is on an unstoppable train heading for a train wreck. More highways, urban sprawl, destruction of the environment, accelerating climate, sea levels rising. We should be in the protection mode and being conservative. So why are these roads to ruin being jammed down our throats? Maybe in a word, greed. Why isn't this on the ballot? Maybe because Floridians would vote no. The state of Florida does not need new roads. The state of Florida does need to improve and repair their existing roads. The state of Florida does not need more pillaging and raping to the environment, like destroying something called a preserve. The state of Florida does need an already imperiled environment to be protected, to be preserved when it's called a preserve. When we don't have any environment left or any water, who's going to be here to even need a road? When we see the sea levels rise and hurricane numbers and intensity rise, what good will more evacuation routes be? Please stop this train wreck now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rubin, for your comment. Up next is Gary Stillwell from Alva, Florida. Gary, you are unmuted.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yep, it's still morning. Quite a few comments here. One of them was on the agenda published. I didn't see it either. I did get a note this morning about 8 o'clock that said something about the agenda or the description of this webinar today had changed. I would agree with a couple of other folks that commented on the agenda being published, like within 24 hours or something. I believe that the state is subject to Chapter 125 and 163 of the Florida statutes that require public notice. I believe, I may be wrong, but I think it's 14 days. So probably ought to take a look at that and stick to it. It seems to be that there's no view whatsoever by either, well, some of the task force members, I think, are beginning to see that there's a possibility that this road is going to be stopped, but apparently FDOT doesn't. There doesn't seem to be any view at all. It's like a foregone conclusion. I think the task force is correct in looking at all this stuff and finding that this may not be the right thing for the state to be doing. I would agree completely with the Leon County Commissioner. This schedule is rushed. Why it's being rushed through like it is, I don't know. That Wakiva Parkway took, I think, 10 years to plan and cost like $64 million a mile or something like that. It ended up being over $20 billion. And we're looking at 300 miles of road. The state doesn't have the money for that, nor is their debt limits allow them to even float the bonds to pay for this thing. I also would have a little bit of an issue with the format that the staff writes the principles with a little bit of input from the task force members. That pretty much takes them out of the loop. And with the format of these meetings, it doesn't allow full interaction so that staff can take a look and really listen to the task force members and find out exactly what it is they're getting at. They even cut off one of the guys that was talking and said, well, we can't have this. We'll talk to you later. Heck no, I'm running out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Up next is Grant Gilhart from Tallahassee, Florida. Grant, you are unmuted.
Hello. Thank you very much. Thank you for the task force for doing all the work you are doing. But there are a number of issues out there. One is that we're talking about, providing broadband, which is great. I mean, we need broadband. Technology is great. But there has really not been any determination of need. And I've mentioned this before, and other people have mentioned this before. I drive US 19, and sometimes I'm the only car out there in the middle of the day. There has been no documented need for additional roadways in this area. These roads are going to be very expensive. These funds could be better used elsewhere in the state where there is an immense traffic problem out there. Back to broadband. Getting broadband to areas like areas in this area, cities in this area is one thing, but that does not connect the rural population. It's the last mile. And to take broadband into Dixie County doesn't get it to the coast. It doesn't get it to the users that need it. It just gets it to the major, maybe the major communities. So if you're really talking about broadband, you need to get it out into the community. And this road really won't do that. It will just lay lines to those major cities or the small cities. And then back to the traffic. There is no documentation that we need this for truck traffic. There's a question whether trucking users will use toll roads, which is up their cost. So I really think the whole toll road proposal misses the point in that, first of all, you need to document the need for a road before trying to figure out the best place to put the road. Also, I have a grave concern that these toll roads will bypass the existing small businesses in towns like Perry and basically destroying some local businesses in these small communities. So I think the toll road will actually have a negative impact on the rural communities that you're trying to help. Thank you very much. And I'll talk to you next time. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Gilhart, for your comment. Up next is Whit Foster from Lamont, Florida. Whit, you are unmuted.
Thank you very much. As I look at the agenda here, I see one of the guiding principles is public input. And as one of the public that's actually listened, one of the very few of the public has been able to listen to these meetings, it's become very apparent that the public is not being provided an opportunity to comment. That the COVID crisis has precluded public meetings in the evening when working citizens can come and speak. Their politicians can get feedback and hear them loud and clearly that they don't want this road. The need hasn't been demonstrated. Today, I heard all about technology and how great it would be coming up the road, but nobody on this task force has answered the question why broadband can't go up the underutilized 17. In the past, nobody on the task force has demonstrated why we need to have wider roads when 17 is unused, underutilized. If this group, this task force, actually let the public come in and comment, I think they would find overwhelmingly that communities don't want it. Common sense says we don't need it. Common sense says that this is being driven by special interests that want a toll road, business interests that want to provide their services and build roads, but the communities don't want it. And it's a shame, it's an absolute shame that so much time and effort and really smart people are holding these hearings, but not receiving public input. The public must hear what your task force has to say and make you guys, require you to answer these questions that have yet to be answered. Why do we need more and wider road going up 19 when we're not using it? Why can't you put your technology on 19 if it's so important? Do we really need this technology? So I think the process has been flawed, and I beg this group to slow down and say, no, we're not doing a good job of reaching out to the public. The public is the one that's deserves this road and should have input onto the road. There are a lot of very capable, smart people in this group, and they need to answer to the citizens of Jefferson County why this road and all of this technology would be good, it's needed, why taxpayer dollars should be spent on this, how this is not going to hurt the environment. And I could go on, but I think you get the message that this whole process needs to be slowed down and actually have meaningful public input. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Up next, Jim Tatum from Tampa, Florida. Jim?
Yes,
you're
can you
unmuted.
hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Yes. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and task force members. My name is Jim Tatum. I'm a member of our Santa Fe River. I had a comment before my written ones here that according to these numbers here, about 1/3 of the attendees have gone away. I don't know how many task force members are there. I hope they're there anyway. If you could put the public comments at the beginning of the meeting, that way we would be assured that we would have an audience. So as I say, I'm not sure if the people I want to speak to are present or not, but almost 50 people have gone from this. So if you can do that, that would help us. We don't get the agenda until late anyway, as I've been saying, so it's difficult to prepare comments pertinent to the discussion, the agenda to come. Anyway, these comments I'm making now are in reference to the MCOR's mission statement. The members of the task force, you have as your mission to evaluate the Suncoast Connector Corridor and to work in coordination with the Florida Department of Transportation to address the need for the corridor and its potential economic and environmental impacts. Please reply to this. No one has yet established a need for these roads. The statement also says the task force may consider and recommend ways to study, design, and land acquisition to mitigate the impacts of construction on the water quality and quantity of springs, rivers, and aquifer recharge areas, agricultural land uses, and wildlife habitat. Please reply to this. We want no land acquisition because the impact on wildlife, agriculture, and our water resources would be disastrous. This process provides stakeholders the opportunity for input and involvement, and also local government involvement. Some local governments have already said no bills, and stakeholders as represented by public comment has been overwhelmingly against these roads because they are not needed. They will bring unwanted development. They will irreparably harm the environment and contribute greatly to the developer's goal of paving over the state of Florida. So members of the task force, when you summarize your recommendations in the final report, of October 1st, 2020. Please send a report with just 2 words, no build. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tatum, for your comment. Up next, Matthew Schwartz from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Matthew, you are unmuted.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Okay, so I'd like to start off reading a little paragraph from an article written in 2016. This is in the Tallahassee Trend, a branch of the Florida Trend, hardly a radical publication here in our state. And the title of this 2016 article is Florida Road Project Has 9 Lives. Each time it seems to die, a road project rises again. A little more than a decade ago, a handful of large landowners and land use attorneys got together to map out a new future for the agricultural interior of Central Florida. The linchpin was a new, nearly 150-mile-long toll highway linking the outskirts of Orlando with the Southwest Florida coast, and unlocking development potential on all the ranch lands and citrus groves in between. They called it the Heartland Parkway. To the people and companies behind it, Heavyweight, Florida agribusinesses, including Alico, Duda & Sons, Likes Brothers, Mosaic, among others, the Heartland Parkway made sense. The development of Florida's interior was inevitable, they argued, as more people moved to the state and control of agricultural companies passed on to a new generation of heirs with little interest in cattle or citrus. A highway would create a corridor in which landowners could develop portions of their property more intensely and more rapidly while setting the rest aside in conservation easements. So there you have it. This is a 2016 article referring to the planning for this 10 years before that, so 2006. And here we are, and people are talking about guiding principles. And I think what you're hearing from a lot of the people in the public, they're getting this. The purpose of these roads is to make money for developers. And it's, we're watching this kind of Kafkaesque display of guiding principles, et cetera, whereas the people who came up with this project this time around and who actually got it passed, Senator Galvano and his colleagues in the Florida legislature, Governor DeSantis, these are not scientists, planners, demographers, wildlife habitat, hydrologists, et cetera. They're politicians. And it's very common that we don't know exactly what drives politicians. But in this case, we seem to have a lot of circumstantial evidence of what it is. People are talking a lot about broadband, and that's a good example of what's wrong with this project. You heard from the panelists, you heard from the task force members, and you heard from the public clearly that broadband can be easily decoupled from the MCORS project. In fact, the cost of broadband, what I'm seeing on the internet, is somewhere around $30,000 a mile, all in. You just got a grant. The task force or the MCORS project got a $5 million grant from the state to develop broadband within the MCORS footprint. That $5 million at $30,000 a mile would pay for 166 miles of broadband, roughly half the length of the corridor. And as the gentleman just pointed out, the big cost with broadband is not getting it down a corridor, it's getting that last mile to people's homes, probably hundreds or possibly thousands of miles of additional.
Time's up, Mr.
We do need
Schwartz.
broadband.
Thank you for your comment. Appreciate your participation. This concludes the public comment segment of the virtual meeting. Thank you to all the commenters for taking time and speaking about this very important topic. Public input is vital to the MCORS process. Public comments may be submitted at any time to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us and will become part of the public record. I would also like to thank the task force members for participating and receiving public comment today. We will be bringing you a summary of all written comments received to date at your July task force meeting. Thank you again for joining us today. This concludes the virtual meeting. Thank you.